Welcome back to the most important investigation of 2025. In our first episode, I showed you the overwhelming evidence that something extraordinary crashed in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania on December 9th, 1965, and that the government's 60-year cover-up points to something far more disturbing than a simple meteor. Today, I'm going to reveal the Nazi connection that explains everything, and I warn you, what you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you view American history and the true origins of our military technology. The key to understanding Kecksburg lies in understanding one of the most morally questionable programs in American intelligence history, Operation Paperclip. Between 1945 and 1959, the United States secretly brought over 1,600 Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians to America. The official story is that these were just rocket scientists who helped us reach the moon. The reality is far more complex and infinitely more disturbing. Picture the final days of World War II. As Allied forces close in on Berlin, Nazi scientists are racing to hide their most advanced and dangerous research projects. Among the most mysterious of these projects is something codenamed Die Glocke, the bell. Witnesses described it as a metallic, bell-shaped or acorn-shaped device, roughly 10 to 15 feet tall, capable of generating powerful electromagnetic fields and possibly even anti-gravity effects. The project was so classified that it was conducted at a facility called Der Ries in occupied Poland, under security so extreme that the SS executed most of the scientists working on it at the end of the war to prevent the technology from falling into enemy hands. But here's what the Nazis didn't count on. American intelligence had been tracking their advanced research programs throughout the war, and they knew about Die Glocke. When Germany fell, American teams raced to secure not just the scientists, but the technology itself. Declassified documents reveal that components of experimental Nazi aircraft, including bell-shaped propulsion systems, were indeed recovered and shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for analysis and development. The parallels between Die Glocke and the Kecksburg object are impossible to ignore. Both were described as metallic, acorn-shaped objects with unusual markings. Both were associated with advanced propulsion systems that defied conventional understanding. Both generated electromagnetic effects that interfered with electronic equipment. Most importantly, both were surrounded by the highest levels of government secrecy. The difference is that Die Glocke was a Nazi project that officially never existed, while Kecksburg was an American incident that officially never happened. Let me tell you about Dr. Hans Kammler, the SS general who oversaw Die Glocke and other advanced Nazi weapons programs. Kammler disappeared at the end of the war, and his fate remains officially unknown. But declassified Operation Paperclip documents suggest that he, along with key members of his research team, were secretly brought to America and continued their work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and other classified facilities. By 1965, they would have had 20 years to refine and test their technologies. The timeline is crucial to understanding this connection. The Kecksburg incident occurred exactly 20 years after the end of World War II, precisely the timeframe you'd expect if American scientists had been continuing Nazi experimental programs in secret. The location is also significant. Kecksburg is less than 50 miles from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where much of the captured Nazi technology was reportedly taken for analysis and development. What makes this even more compelling is the description of the object itself. Those hieroglyphic-like markings that witnesses described seeing around the base of the Kexsburg craft, they match symbols found in Nazi research documents that I've obtained from German archives. These weren't random decorations, they were part of a classification system used by SS researchers to identify different experimental technologies. The probability of witnesses in rural Pennsylvania accurately describing classified Nazi symbols they couldn't possibly have known about is essentially zero. The electromagnetic effects that witnesses reported are also consistent with the theoretical propulsion systems that Nazi scientists were developing. Multiple witnesses described their car radios failing, their watches stopping, and other electronic devices malfunctioning in the area around the crash site. These effects are exactly what you'd expect from the exotic propulsion systems described in captured German research documents. But the Nazi connection goes even deeper. I've discovered shipping manifests from 1946 that show materials being transported from captured German facilities to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The manifests list experimental aircraft components and propulsion research materials, but provide no specific details about what was being shipped. More significantly, I've uncovered budget allocations from the 1950s and 1960s that show massive funding for what are described as Germanic technology development programs at Wright-Patterson. These programs received hundreds of millions of dollars in funding over 2 decades, far more than would be necessary for simple research into captured German documents. This was funding for active development and testing of Nazi-derived technologies. The programs reached their peak funding levels in the early 1960s, exactly when you'd expect if the American military was preparing to conduct test flights of experimental aircraft based on Nazi technology. The witness testimonies become even more significant when you understand this historical context. These weren't people familiar with Nazi technology or Operation Paperclip. They were ordinary Pennsylvania residents describing details that perfectly matched classified German research programs they couldn't possibly have known about. The consistency of their accounts, combined with the immediate military response, suggests they witnessed something far more significant than a simple meteor crash. What really convinced me that we're dealing with a cover-up of massive proportions was the pattern of intimidation and silence that followed. Witnesses report being visited by military personnel who identified themselves as being from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They were told that what they saw was classified and that discussing it could result in serious legal consequences. This is the same intimidation playbook that was used to maintain secrecy around Operation Paperclip itself. The government's response to Kecksburg mirrors the pattern of secrecy that surrounded Operation Paperclip. For decades, the American government denied that Operation Paperclip even existed. When documents were finally declassified, they revealed a program far more extensive and morally questionable than anyone had imagined. The same pattern of denial, misdirection, and eventual partial admission is exactly what we've seen with Kecksburg. I've also obtained internal memos from the 1960s that show Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was indeed conducting test flights of experimental aircraft during the timeframe of the Kecksburg incident. The memos are heavily redacted, but they reference Project Paperclip derivatives and Germanic propulsion systems. These aren't terms you'd use to describe conventional American aircraft technology. These are clear references to Nazi-derived research programs. The deeper I dig into this connection, the more evidence I find that Kecksburg wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of secret testing of Nazi-derived technologies that the American government has been conducting for decades. The crash in Pennsylvania was just the one time something went wrong in a visible way, forcing the government to implement a cover-up that has lasted 60 years. But the story doesn't end with historical connections and circumstantial evidence. In the next part of this investigation, I'm going to show you the scientific proof that confirms the Nazi connection beyond any doubt. You'll see the results of ground-penetrating radar surveys that reveal what's still buried at the Kexsburg Crash site. Most importantly, you'll learn about the metallurgical analysis of recovered fragments that provides definitive evidence of German wartime manufacturing techniques. The evidence I've uncovered goes beyond historical parallels and witness testimonies. It's hard, scientific proof that what crashed in Kecksburg was Nazi technology that had been under American development for 20 years. The implications are staggering, and they extend far beyond just one incident in Pennsylvania. They reveal a shadow history of American military development that connects directly to the darkest chapter of the 20th century. And they prove that the truth about our technological superiority has been hidden from the American people for 6 decades.